For those of you who just joined, we thought we would give everybody a 4-minute grace period, actually 5 minutes to 5:05, and get everything kicked off then. In the meantime, we were going to quietly stare at one another. I guess it would be interesting to kind of get a bit of a show of hands, and I think part of the we'll talk about this a little bit more. Being able to do this by Zoom presents some unique opportunities as well as some difficulties. But before we got too far into the weeds, I think it would be helpful to know, generally, I think the answer for most people on this call is that they're still in school. I have not graduated yet, albeit I do see a couple names here, I think Mr. Walters, who may have graduated. So just by show of hands, meaning your online hand, not your actual hand, or you could do that too, how many people here are still students and have not graduated? Okay, keep them up. Brian, are you still a student? Yeah. Okay. Good. So pretty good chunk of people. What about, so put your hands down, your virtual hand. How many people are still, are just recent graduates? So I got one. I think there's more than that though. So maybe a couple. All right. Well, let's see here. And does everybody have their beverage of choice, by the way? This is a happy hour after all. My son just gave me my beverage. It's a glass of water, but for others. Jed, you're at the ballpark. I expect you to have a beer. And you do. Good for you, sir. Joni, what do you got?
I got nothing.
You got nothing. You got nothing for the happy hour. Sad.
Yeah, I just finished the Diet Coke, so if that counts.
I guess it does. Mr. Minsky, what do you got?
I've just got water for now because I I haven't gotten to the bar yet. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You gotta see, my bar is like right there. It's right in there.
I've got to like
Where's
get
the
up
bar
and walk to my bar.
Oh, wait, I am the barkeep.
I have this great mason jar.
All right.
Class of 20.
Well, let's go ahead and get. Oh, there you are, Denali.
Yeah, if any of you need drinkware, the upcoming 3L class is selling this wonderful embossed Flying WV mason jar. We have a surplus of them, so please email me. I would love to sell you one.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So as I said before, this medium provides us some pretty unique opportunities to communicate. And we, meaning me, Jonathan Marshall, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a practicing lawyer in Charleston. I've got a regional law firm, maybe national, I don't know, with about, seems like 10 locations now. And in my spare free time, which is not very much, but I actually also direct a Center for Consumer Law and Education at the university. And as part of that, I've had the opportunity to now teach 2 different classes and also do a lot of different things through the center. And by way of background, the center itself is a partnership between the West Virginia University College of Law and Marshall University. And so there's actually a co-director, Dr. Arthur, Damian Arthur, who's in the political science department there. Joni, who's actually on the screen here, is a significant other, better half, I should say. And, you know, the center itself has been up and running for about a year and a half. And really, our ambition for the center is to be a force and an area of support, not only for people in this state, but actually nationally. And so I'm actually really proud. We, at the end of, or the beginning of this year, we filed our first amicus brief in a little case called Celia Law, the CFPB. It dealt with the constitutionality of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We did that in conjunction with UC Berkeley, with Yale, with people in Alabama, with NCLC, a whole host of groups. And so, you know, we're not only doing work here, but we're also doing work nationally. And kind of the vision behind the center itself was, again, as I indicated before, to be a force in the state as well as nationally. But in the state itself, you know, we kind of had 4 prongs or things that we wanted to do. And all of them circulated or centered around this notion of service. And so we wanted to serve the public. And we've been doing that at least up until the point in time in which all this hit, by actually hosting live and in-person events. Back in February, for instance, we were down in the Senior Citizens Center in Beckley. We had developed a curriculum, and we're implementing that curriculum in the Wayne County school system, you know, on financial literacy. And so we've been doing that kind of work and trying to serve the public. We also have a pretty robust website, which we're adding more content on, which addressing kind of these how-to and where to get information for kind of the use of the general public. We're also serving policy advocates, legislators and others through policy pieces. And we have 2 pieces that have been commissioned. One is nearing its final stages, I believe. Joni's going to talk to you a little bit about that. And it centers around the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Additionally, Professor Jenna Martin is going to be publishing a white paper that we commissioned on privacy issues. And so more on that later. We also had a service mission for our partner organizations. And so for the first time last year, actually, we hosted together practitioners, industry folks, people from the plaintiff's bar, defense bar, and everybody in between together in West Virginia to talk about consumer law. And you know, we're going to be hosting our second annual event. It was scheduled for June. We're going to have to cancel that. We're going to move that to the fall. But you know, more on that. And then finally, we wanted to be of service to students. And so part of that is, I'm going to change my profile here. Part of that was by offering courses. I got into consumer law purely by happenstance, meaning I just so happened to graduate from WVU, started practicing at a firm that was doing this type of work. And as I got into it, what I found was this wealth of opportunities, meaning I was running cases at pretty early age as far as being a lawyer, because nobody else was doing the work. There wasn't a lot of competition in the marketplace, and there was a definite need for that type of service. And so it's allowed me to really build a nationwide practice very early, and it's provided a lot of different opportunities to associate with folks and to really do some pretty big and consequential work. So as part of that, I didn't want your all's entry to be happenstance. And so part of that was teaching courses. So taught first course last fall, taught another course this spring, dealing with called the Anatomy of a Consumer Case, where I'm actually teaching a course in the summer called Masters of Litigation, which is going to be interesting. Essentially, it's a 1-hour course, but the idea is to do case studies every single week and have the actual practitioners who did that case come and talk to the class and teach the class along with me. We'll be offering in the fall another consumer course. It'll be a doctrinal survey course on consumer law. That's the one I taught this last fall. And I think for those who took the course, they'll know that essentially I think just about every class, we had 1 or 2, sometimes 3 guest lecturers talking about some facet of consumer law. And so what we're doing today is part and parcel with what I wanted to do at the center, and that was to both serve students and also serve the public at large by providing information about consumer-related issues. And so the topic of today's discussion is going to be student loans. We have people who, most people on here have student loans, I would assume. We took a show of hands beforehand to identify those who were still students, as well as those who are recent graduates. And so what we're essentially going to do today is we're gonna have a series of 3 speakers. Each of them are going to talk about a facet of student loans and things you need to know. I think probably the best thing to do is to make this more interactive is we've got I've got the Zoom group chat going. And so if you've got a question, just type it out and I'll ask one of our speakers. For those of you who know me, you also know that I don't tend to like introductions. I don't like when I'm introduced, and I don't necessarily like to introduce other people because I think that you always miss things. But one of the things I talked to you about at the very beginning of this was this notion of this medium provides a lot of great opportunities. And one of those great opportunities is we're able to bring in people of repute, people that would be very difficult to get down here just because of work commitments, live and in person. And so our first speaker, Adam Minsky, is somebody who I've actually been working on to try to get down here for a considerable amount of time, but haven't been able to do so. But he's here today. And Adam, by way of background or the brief introduction, is essentially a guru when it comes to student loans. I've sent many, many, many people to Adam who have difficult, intractable student loan questions. I've sent family members to Adam. I think I even sent my wife to Adam at one point in time. And he always gives great sage advice. And if I were to survey the field of all the people out there who are practicing in this space, I'd say he's the guru when it comes to student loans. And so you all are going to have the benefit of hearing from Adam today. And I'm very glad that he's here. Next, you're going to hear from Joni Magnusson. Joni is a faculty at Marshall University. She's actually one of our fellows, one of the CCLE's fellows, and she's done a whole host of work and research related to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, one of these programs that relates to student loan forgiveness. And part of her mission was to try to understand why nobody can get through the daggone system. And she's going to talk to you a little bit about some of her findings, as well as, I think some of her own experiences in dealing with the program personally. Then finally, we've got Jed Nolan, who's our baseball fan out there. And the only person that appeared, well, actually, Denali, yeah, you did too, but appears to have brought a beverage with them. And Jed is going to talk to you a little bit about litigation in cases and bankruptcy. And because after all, there's a lot of law students on this call. I think actually everybody is a lawyer or a law student. So we're going to have a piece of that, and then we're going to wrap everything up. So again, along the way, feel free to ask questions and just type them in the Zoom chat, and we'll go ahead and get started. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over, maybe the panel over to Adam. Adam, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself? I've done the very best I could. So if there's anything.
Oh, that was a great introduction. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you having me here. So yeah, I am a solo practitioner, and I started my practice about a little over 9 years ago now, right out of law school. Started off as like a side gig, essentially. I also did not go to law school to become a consumer rights attorney. This was not in the cards. I didn't take a single consumer rights class in law school, so I just kind of fell into this. What happened was I had a student loan problem when I graduated, and I couldn't figure out what to do. And so I tried to get someone to help me, but there was no one out there who specialized in this. And so there was no one to help me. And I was astounded by that. So or at least I couldn't find anyone. So I figured it out, but in the process of that, this was still sort of during the tail end of the recession. Jobs were scarce. I had a lot of fellow graduates and classmates from law school who were struggling with their loans. So I started a side practice focused on just counseling people. It quickly blew up into a full-time position, and I've been doing it ever since. So a chunk of my practice involves still just counseling people, kind of walking them through what is unfortunately a very ridiculously complex system, understanding the loans and your options and what you should be doing to maximize your eligibility for certain programs or save the most money. I mean, it's insane how complicated it can be. I shouldn't have a job doing this, but here I am doing it. I also help people work through disputes or problems. So people who applied for a program, they were denied, or people who, had an error on their credit report or a miscalculation of a payment, something like that. I help people kind of resolve those types of disputes. And then I also help people who are in distress and people who are in trouble. So people who have fallen behind on their payments, they're in collections, they're in default, their wages are being garnished, their Social Security is being offset, they're being sued. I defend people and help them resolve those issues as well. So I've been doing it since I graduated, and there's no end in sight. So still doing it now.
And I think just to kind of follow up on that,
Mm-hmm.
The problems in the student loan industry, I mean, there's just a myriad of problems.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see opportunities for students to enter into the job market to help people essentially with student loan type issues?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's still to this date a very small number of practitioners who focus in this area. I know all of them, I think, and I can count them all on one or two hands, depending on the criteria you're using. So there's, and there's 44 million student loan borrowers here. So there is no possible way that myself and my handful of colleagues who specialize in this can possibly help everyone. So we definitely need more people to focus in this area. I mean, the fun thing about student loans is that it does touch on a lot of other areas of consumer protection that people do tend to focus on. So it touches credit reporting, it touches debt collection, it touches unfair and deceptive acts and practices. If you want to do bankruptcy, it can certainly bankruptcy is relevant as well. So even if you're not focusing on student debt issues as I am, if you're going to go into consumer rights, doing student loan work, I think, is important, and there's plenty of opportunities to do that.
I hate to plug too much, but one of the reasons and I'm completely transparent about this, but one of the reasons we give these talks and I'm doing what I'm doing is to talk about opportunities. And there are lots of opportunities. There's opportunities to, again, serve consumers. There's opportunities to defend these cases, right? There's opportunities to work in a regulatory perspective or in a regulatory area.
Mm-hmm.
There's opportunities to work in industry and keep your clients out of hot water. And so, this is a huge, tremendous problem. All that ballooning debt is a problem. And when there are problems, people are going to need solutions. And what we do as lawyers, fundamentally, is we provide answers. And so for me, I came into this at a very opportune time in terms of being a lawyer, in a sense that right when this whole mortgage meltdown was happening, right? So I graduated in 2007, 2018, the meltdown happens. And so I am doing nothing but mortgage-related cases. And I've got so much work, and my partners had so much work. They're like, Marshall, go do this. Marshall, go do that. And through that experience, I gained experience. I gained knowledge. I gained skills as a lawyer, which allowed me then to build a practice, and a valuable practice, and show value to my ultimate people who became my partners. And so, again, I hate to plug too much, but that's in part why we're here. So let's go ahead and transition a little bit. Adam, I want to talk now a little bit about, because it's on everybody's mind, COVID-19. What's happening in the student loan space as it pertains to COVID-19?
Yeah. So, I mean, things have in, you know, really rapidly developed. I mean, not just in terms of the pandemic, but also in terms of the responses to the pandemic as it relates to student loans. And I think that in and of itself has caused folks to have some confusion. Where we are as of right now is that the big student loan relief package was passed as part of the CARES Act, which was the major stimulus package that passed a few weeks ago. The big takeaways about the CARES Act is that it suspends all interest, all payments, and all involuntary collections on federal student loans held by the Department of Education through September 30th, 2020. So no interest is accruing, no payments are due, and the normal collections practices that the Department of Ed and its army of debt collectors engage in through involuntary wage garnishments, Social Security offsets, and intercepts of tax refunds. All of that is basically stopped. And what's more is it operates sort of like a forbearance, but normally forbearances basically are, aside from not having to pay anything, they don't count towards anything. And so forbearances can be really problematic. In this case, the CARES Act actually states that the months of suspended payments will qualify towards loan forgiveness programs. That includes loan forgiveness programs under income-driven plans. It also includes public service loan forgiveness, and for borrowers who are trying to get out of default through a special payment plan called rehabilitation, it also counts towards rehabilitation as well. So it's a very unique form of payment suspensions. So in many ways, it's exactly what we need, at least the bare minimum of exactly what we need during this unique time of crisis. The downside is that the scope of the CARES Act is limited to federal loans that are held by the government. And so there's an entire other category of federal loans that are not held by the government. There's an older federal loan program that we call the Family Federal Education Loan Program, or FELP for short, also known as the Guaranteed Loan Program. These are federal loans that were issued by a private lender, but backed or guaranteed by the government, but they're not held by the government. Those loans are not covered by the CARES Act. And of course, private loans, which are purely private and held by commercial lending entities, those aren't covered. And federal Perkins loans held by colleges and universities are also not covered. So there's whole categories of student loan borrowers that are only getting partial relief. Some are getting no relief at all, despite the provisions of the CARES Act. There is some movement on that. The University of California just announced that they're going to be suspending payments on their Perkins loans. I expect that some other university systems may follow. There was a bipartisan bill introduced into Congress. I just wrote about it in Forbes today, introduced by an interesting collection of Congress people that would provide CARES Act-like protections for FEL program loans. I don't know if it'll pass, but it has bipartisan support, so I'm cautiously optimistic. No movement yet on private loans. We'll have to see what happens there. But that's where things are as of right now.
And one real quick question, it's not a quick question at all, but if you were to have a magic wand, what would you do? I mean, and you had the power of Congress. What do you think ought to be done?
It's a great question. It's probably something that I could talk about for longer than I have. I mean, I'll put it this way. There are, I think, two competing camps when it comes to student loan reform. I think everyone agrees that the student loan system is a mess. It is collapsing under its own weight, and it's clearly not sustainable. That includes the current student loan system, but also higher education financing in general. The rate of the cost of higher education is going up much higher than the rate of inflation. Public investment in colleges and universities has gone down, and so the net result is people are relying more and more on debt that they can't pay. So what's the solution? I mean, you have two camps. You have people who think that we should improve the existing system by making repayment fairer. So that could involve some combination of reforms like simplifying income-driven repayment, simplifying loan forgiveness programs, giving people more opportunities to reduce their debt or get it paid off or get it forgiven, loosening bankruptcy restrictions. It's very difficult, but not impossible to discharge student debt in bankruptcy. So loosening that would be a way to go. But basically the idea, and we'll call it camp one, is take the existing system, make it fairer, simpler, easier to navigate, and give more folks opportunities to address it. That also includes cracking down on for-profit schools, going after folks that defraud, borrowers, things like that. Then there's another camp that is pushing for some sort of widespread, student loan forgiveness. So that could be universal student loan forgiveness of the type pushed by Bernie Sanders, for instance. It could be a more means-tested type of student loan forgiveness where it's capped at a certain amount and tailored towards certain income levels. That was Elizabeth Warren's plan. What's interesting is that if I had a magic wand, which was in your, I don't know what the correct answer is, but where I think we're going is some sort of blend of those two camps. What I think is fascinating is that Joe Biden, the presumptive nominee, who resisted and pushed back very hard on both Warren's plan and Bernie Sanders' plan for loan forgiveness, has now adopted elements of loan forgiveness in his student loan proposal, which I just find fascinating because that never would have happened even a year ago, and now here we are, and that's part of his menu of reform proposals. It doesn't go as far as either Bernie's or Warren's plans, but the fact that he's calling for widespread student loan forgiveness that would benefit millions of borrowers is, I think, a big deal. So I think that it's increasingly possible that we'll see some form of student loan forgiveness on a widespread scale as part of a larger menu of reform. And I think we need to consider that. Even if it means that I'm out of a job, I think that, we do need to address this. It's just not sustainable. When I started doing this in 2011, there was, I think, 700 billion in outstanding student loan debt. 9 years later, it's 1.6 trillion. I mean, it's more than doubled in less than a decade. This cannot continue. So I think we need some combination of simplifying the system, opening up more options for people, and probably some form of universal loan forgiveness as well.
Thanks for that. So let's transition again. So we've got a lot of folks here are still students. And I want to talk to you a little bit about, have you talk a little bit about what they can do while still in school, whether it be through consolidation or exploring a loan forgiveness programs to put them in the very best position to succeed with their student loans. So these are people who are still in school.
Yeah, so I mean, I think number one, minimize borrowing to the extent that you can. That just may not be possible, and I understand that. But try not to overborrow. If you can bring the cost of education down even a little bit by minimizing your living expenses, by working a bit, whatever you can do to reduce the cost of borrowing, because at this point, most, if not all, student loans that you're going to take out as a graduate student or a law student are unsubsidized, and they tend to have higher interest rates. You're accruing interest as soon as you get the loan. And so if you can minimize that to the extent possible, or at least reduce it even a little bit, the cumulative effect of that over time when you factor in interest can actually be pretty significant. So I think that's number one. Number two, I think taking stock of what loans you've got and where you expect to go with your career, I think is also pretty important as well. So for instance, some of the major student loan programs that, we talk about, like income-driven repayment, public service loan forgiveness, those are limited to federal loans only. So you really want to be careful about, for instance, taking out private loans because private loans are not eligible for those programs. In terms of figuring out what type of loans you want to take out, do your homework and figure out, what is repayment going to look like for these loans? What programs could they be eligible for? And then I would say, when you're in an in-school status, there's not much you can do. You can voluntarily make payments if you want. Whether that's a good idea or not really depends on your unique circumstances. But really, I think that once you approach the end of your third year, and you are about to enter repayment, but before you start stressing out about the bar exam, that is a really good opportunity, I think, to take stock of what you've got in terms of student loans, what repayment options are available to you. Should you consolidate? Is that necessary? What do you need to do to get on track for a program like income-driven repayment or public service loan forgiveness, and have a plan in place? Because what you don't want is to be in the midst of bar exam hell, and then get hit with a bill that you can't afford to pay, and then that just adds to your stress and your panic.
So you had mentioned kind of taking stock. My son's asking a question. You had mentioned taking stock, and in kind of a good time doing that is kind of that period in time before taking that bar exam. What things ought a person kind of take stock? And if you could, I understand that there's certain eligibility requirements for this income-based or the public service loan forgiveness program. What are some of the things or some of the paths a person could take, and some pitfalls for the unwary? I know this can't be completely comprehensive, but just a couple pitfalls for the unwary.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that we see, so I mentioned, just a few minutes ago, that there are these different types of federal loan programs. There's loans that are held by the government. We typically call that direct loans. And then there's these other loans that we call guaranteed loans or FEL program loans. Those were older, so that program was just continued back in 2010, but there's still a lot of FEL loans out there. One of the big problems we see, for instance, with a program like public service loan forgiveness, is that only direct loans are eligible, but not everyone realizes that. And so what that means is you have a lot of folks that have these older FEL loans that, they either think that they're doing the right thing because they make that assumption, or in some cases they were actively misled by their servicer to think that they were doing the right thing, which has formed the basis of several lawsuits. But bottom line is, you got to do the work in the beginning to understand what loans you've got and what's the eligibility criteria for the programs that you want to get on track for. So for instance, there is a way of turning a FEL loan into a direct loan and making it eligible for public service loan forgiveness. That process is called consolidation. But you got to know to do that. And there are sometimes downsides to consolidating, right? You lose the benefits that you might have on the individual loans. You restart your repayment term. You could capitalize your interest. So all of that, you got to understand what the options are, and also understand the implications of going with a certain course of action. Another big one that I see, and this is a big thing for law grads and graduates of medical school as well, is you're going to start hearing a lot about refinancing. There's a lot of companies out there that will offer a refinancing package, where you can get a lower interest rate and maybe lower your monthly payments. What people need to understand is that while many of these companies are legitimate, they're offering you a private loan product. And so you might be able to lower your interest rate by refinancing through a private loan, but you're also giving up all the program options and benefits and consumer protections of the federal student loan system. That's not only things like income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness, but also default resolution, generous deferment options during times of hardship, a tax-free discharge if you die, or if you become sick or injured and can't work anymore, there's a tax-free disability discharge. And so by refinancing through a private lender, you could be giving up on those protections, and that's really something to be aware of. The other big pitfall that I'll just throw out to people is that because the system is so complicated, because there's not enough people that do what I do, and because there's a lot of people who have a lot of questions and confusion about the system, there are a lot of scammers out there who take advantage of that confusion and that anxiety. They might induce people to pay for a service that you don't need, that you can do for free. They might complete your paperwork for you, but do it incorrectly. They might, engage in fraud on your behalf. They might just steal your identity. And so you got to be really wary of these so-called student loan, debt help firms who pressure people into signing, these contracts and giving them their login credentials to get into programs that you otherwise can access for free. So I think those are the big things that people should be aware of. And again, knowledge really is power here. So if you do your homework early on and you understand what your options are and what to do, you can, you'll be less likely to make a mistake or to become a victim of a student loan scammer.
Great, thanks. So kind of moving forward, let's say after graduation, kind of the same question, how can you best put yourself in a position to succeed, assuming you've hopefully done the things that you talked about, as well as what are some of the common pitfalls for the unwary that you see after a person enters repayment?
Yeah, so I think so understanding whether or not you should consolidate or not is a big one, because when you consolidate your loans, you're getting a new loan, you're starting over on your repayment term. That might not matter to some people. That could be a big downside to consolidating for some other people. For instance, if before law school you made, let's say, 4 years of qualifying payments towards public service loan forgiveness on your loans, and then you consolidate everything after law school, great. Well, now you've just erased that 4 years of progress you've made. You're starting over. That could be a big problem. On the other hand, if it makes sense to consolidate, you might want to do that shortly after graduating so that you're not facing that same problem 3 or 4 years from now. It also is important to understand your grace periods. Grace periods are a certain period of time after graduating during which no payments are due. Grace periods are one-time use. So if you already used up your grace periods for older loans, say for your undergraduate degree, you might not have a grace period on those loans. They might become due much sooner than you think. And if you've already consolidated some of your loans, generally speaking, those consolidation loans don't have grace periods either. So understand when your loans are going to become due, what grace periods you have, so that you can prepare for that, and that you can either make the payments or you can go into some sort of payment postponement situation if you need to. Understand what forms are required, what procedures are required to do something like applying for an income-driven plan or certifying for your public service employment. Most of those forms are easily accessible, but you got to know, where to do that. And I think overall, coming up with a plan for how you're going to address everything going forward, how you're going to manage your loans, is also really important. If you've got a mix of federal and private loans, for instance, private loans are not eligible for income-driven repayment. So you got to budget for those payments. You might want to look into refinancing the private loans if you have really high interest rates. They're already a private loan, so you're not giving up much in the way of protections. But if you've got a 10% rate, you might want to look into refinancing to something a little bit more reasonable. And so I think taking the time early on to come up with a plan of action is really critical, I think, to succeeding. And also going back and reevaluating that plan of action. If you're on an income-driven plan and you get married, for instance, marriage can really impact your student loan payments. There's an income-driven plan that always factors in spousal income. There's another plan that only does it if you're filing taxes jointly. You could file separately, but that might cause you to pay more in taxes. So you got to take the time to kind of understand this, run the numbers, which plan is best for you. If you have a kid, that could change things. If you change jobs, if you get a pay bump or a pay reduction, again, all of these things can impact your strategy. The good news is that in most cases, you're not locked into any particular track. So, understand that whatever makes sense for you now may not make sense for you 2 years from now or 5 years from now. And so it's okay to go back. In fact, you should go back and kind of take a second look. Does this approach still make sense? Should I be making any changes?
Good. I have kind of two more kind of groups of questions. The first group of questions relates to if you could just briefly talk about the primary loan forgiveness programs that exist now. If you just identify those and just briefly go over the eligibility. And we're going to hear a little bit more about one of them from Joni here in a second.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly touch on PSLF and public service loan forgiveness because I know you're going to go into more detail on that. But basically, it's a program that allows borrowers to get any remaining balance forgiven on their loans after what we call 120 qualifying payments, which, if made consecutively, is about 10 years, a tax-free form of loan forgiveness. There's teacher loan forgiveness, which is a special loan forgiveness program for certain types of teachers who teach in certain types of schools. It requires 5 consecutive years of service, and it's capped at $17,500. There's Perkins loan forgiveness. So Perkins loans are a special type of federal loans issued by a college or university. There's a long list of jobs and occupations that can qualify for full Perkins loan cancellation. Some of them include public defenders, law enforcement, some teachers, firefighters, librarians, healthcare workers. Those are the big ones. There's certain types of discharges for school misconduct. No need to go, I think, into great detail there, but that has been in the news a lot lately with regard to a big one called borrower defense to repayment. And then there's a disability discharge program for federal student loans and some private student loans as well. I think those are the big ones that I think most people would encounter.
Okay, and we've obviously we have limited time here, but I think a fundamental question is what are some resources folks can rely on to get help?
Yeah, so I would say number one, for federal loans, the Department of Ed actually does have some decent information on their web portal. So you can go to studentaid.gov, and they do have some good free information there. The National Consumer Law Center has some good information on their website. They run a program called the Student Loan Borrower Assistance Project. It's basically a blog that has a lot of good free information. So that's a good place to go. You could check out my blog. You could check out my Forbes page. I write, if that's more about breaking news stories or latest developments. So I've been writing a ton of articles about the CARES Act and other related recent changes. If you want to actually practice in this area or really get into the granular stuff, there's a manual you can purchase from National Consumer Law Center called Student Loan Law that has a ton of information there, but you got to pay for that. But really, I think the Department of Ed's website and National Consumer Law Center, I always refer people to those two resources to get some good free information on student loans.
We had one or two questions for you.
Sure.
First question was, let's see here. For the proposed plans, including Biden's plan, would there be a cap as to how much money could be forgiven? So this is related to kind of one of the first ones we talked about.
Yeah, so when it comes to student loan forgiveness, so Senator Sanders proposed basically universal student loan forgiveness with no caps at all. Warren's plan would have had a cap of $50,000 per borrower, and it would have been phased out for higher income earners. Biden's program would forgive all undergraduate federal student loan debt for borrowers who attended public colleges and universities, as well as historically Black colleges and universities and private minority serving institutions. So generally speaking, undergraduate federal student loan debt tends to be around $37,000. So that, plus interest. So that's roughly the cap, I believe, that you'd be looking at for his plan. It's not too far off from Warren's $50,000 cap. Biden has also expressed support for a House Democratic proposal that would forgive $10,000 per borrower universally in response to COVID-19. One more thing about Biden's plan, though, is that he also has a means test. So he would start phasing out the benefit for borrowers who earn, I believe, more than $125,000 per year.
Good deal. And then there's another question. Does the public service loan forgiveness program include federal direct loans and federal plus loans? Is there a difference?
So the key is that it's a direct loan program. Under the direct loan umbrella, you can have Stafford loans, you can have plus loans that are issued to grad students, you can have plus loans that are issued to parents. So it has to be a direct loan, whether it's a Stafford loan or a PLUS loan, doesn't matter. It matters whether it's a direct loan or not, because that other federal loan program, the FEL program, also has Stafford loans and PLUS loans, but those are not direct loans. So it's direct loans only. That's the key. Whether it's a Stafford loan or a PLUS loan matters less.
Question was, does consolidating still keep a loan federal? So I don't fully understand it, meaning as long as you don't refinance with a private entity.
Right, exactly. So there is one and only one federal consolidation program, and it's through the Department of Education's direct consolidation program. And that is also accessible via that same website I mentioned a few minutes ago, studentaid.gov. So as long as you're consolidating through that program, only federal loans are eligible for that program. That is a federal consolidation program. It remains a federal loan. It's specifically, it's a federal direct loan program, which is why if you consolidate those older FEL loans in that program, you're effectively converting that loan into a direct loan, because what you end up is a direct consolidation loan. So yes, as long as you do it through that, it functions as a federal loan. When I mention refinancing, I'm talking about private lenders. Now, private refinancing can also function as a consolidation vehicle if you're combining multiple loans into a single loan. But if you're doing it through any other program other than the Department of Ed's direct consolidation loan program, that essentially is some sort of private program. And once you go private, you can't go back into the federal loan system. So it's a one-way street out of the federal loan system. You don't want to do that most of the time. I don't want to say never. It does make sense for some people, but you do walk away from those consumer protections and program benefits if you do that.
I think one final question, I think you're actually related to another, there's another one. Is there a forgiveness cap on the public service loan forgiveness program?
There is not. There is a parallel program that I don't want to get too into called temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. It's basically designed for certain borrowers who were doing something a little wrong, maybe unknowingly. They were in the wrong payment plan. You can get relief for being in the wrong payment plan through this TEPSLF program. That program is capped at $500,000 per borrower, but PSLF has no cap.
Now I'm getting all sorts of questions. I was referring to. Oh, yeah, sure. So Lindsay's got great questions, by the way. No, so basically the question Lindsay has related to the plans or Biden's plan. Is there going to be any relief for grad loans?
Not under Biden's plan. That could change, right? I mean, this is just a proposal. I will say that generally speaking, politicians really don't like grad students. They particularly don't like law grads or medical school grads. So if someone's going to get screwed, unfortunately, it's probably going to be those people. So, it is what it is. But Biden's plan only speaks to undergraduate debt.
Appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you, Adam. I want to go ahead and transition now to Joni, because we're trying to keep this under an hour and a half. Somebody says, clearly we need to form a lobby of law students. I agree. And by all means, this is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. So I hope that folks who have additional questions will contact me, contact Adam directly, look at some of those resources that are out there. And so, hopefully we continue the dialogue. But Adam, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. I know you're a busy person. And with that said, I'm going to turn things over to Joni to talk a little bit more in depth about her research in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Joni Magnusson, as Jonathan said, and I am a faculty member at Marshall University. I, through the CCLE, have been doing some research on the language that's used to talk to borrowers, and particularly student loan borrowers, and more specifically borrowers in the PSLF program. And we've written with a colleague, I've written a white paper about the types of language patterns that we can see being used in this communication. And so I'm not going to talk too much about that, because part of our research also uncovered just how complicated this PSLF program is, which I sort of knew going into it. My husband, Damien, who's the co-director of the CCLE at Marshall on the Marshall side, has loans that we have run through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And so I was very familiar with it going in, but we just were struck over and over again by just how complicated this program really is and how many mistakes are made. And a pretty startling statistic was that over 99% of people who have applied for forgiveness, which 2017 was the first year that people were eligible to apply, so it hasn't been that long, but 99% of people who have applied have been rejected for one reason or another. So we started to look into what those reasons were. And so I put together a slideshow that talks about how to go about applying for forgiveness and hopefully be successful in that. And I'm just gonna say, Adam, if you're still on and you hear anything that I say that you wanna chime in and add to or correct, please feel free, because you're more of an expert on this program than I likely am. So happily, and you'll hear you'll hear me say some of the same things we've already said too. So I'm going to share my screen here. So if you can just bear with me for one quick second while I figure out how to do that. I don't want to share my desktop. I want to share. Can you guys see my screen? Or are you still?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So you can see the applying for public service loan forgiveness.
Yep, we got it.
Okay, awesome. So the goal is for you to succeed in applying, and it is a multi-step process, some of which you've already heard us talk about. So the first thing is that you need to have the right kind of loan. So you need to check what kind of loan you have, and a lot of people don't even know that there are different types of loans, is what we figured out as we were doing this research. So you always want to check what kind of loan you have and where you can do that. Hold on, I'm just going to minimize. Okay, you can look on, I've just pulled, these all look a little different depending on what loan servicer you have, but if you can see, this one I pulled as a sample shows that you have, this person's loan is a direct subsidized consolidation loan. So those are terms you've already heard us say, right? Direct and consolidation. And so this is the type of loan that you need to have for PSLF. It needs to be federal, it needs to be direct. It does not have to be consolidated. However, if you don't have all federal direct loans, but you have at least one that is, you can consolidate all or most of your loans into a direct consolidation loan, which is also, it qualifies for PSLF. And then this is the website that Adam mentioned, the studentaid.gov. This is the link you use to apply to consolidate to a direct loan. And again, like I said, you need to think through all of the ramifications of consolidating. One of them is that you tend to lose your 6-month or whatever grace period. So if you need that, you could wait to consolidate for a couple of months. That's one option. So step 1, right kind of loan. Step 2, you need to be on the right kind of payment plan. We'll see in a little bit, there are lots of horror stories in that 99% of people who were rejected for loan forgiveness, who had the right kind of loans and thought that they were paying on and into the PSLF program, only to find out sometimes years later that they weren't paying the right kind of payment. And so none of those payments count. So you need to check your payment plan type. And again, you can do this on your student loan website, your servicer's website. So if you see this arrow here, again, this person's loan is on an income-based repayment, which we've also already kind of talked about. So that is one of the qualifying repayment plans. Any income-driven repayment plan, which is a plan that bases your monthly payment on your income, is eligible. And there's a couple. There's the revised pay-as-you-earn repayment plan, the pay-as-you-earn repayment plan, the income-based repayment plan, which is the one that you saw on the previous screen, and the income contingent repayment plan. So those are all qualifying. The standard repayment plan also qualifies. However, if you're on a standard repayment plan of 10 years and you make a monthly payment every month for 10 years, after you've paid 120 payments, which is what you need to make in order to get your loans forgiven under PSLF, your loans will be gone. So under most circumstances. So it's kind of a wash in that case. So you need to be on the right kind of payment plan. Once you consolidate, you have the option to select the repayment plan that you want. It is, the default is not necessarily an income-driven plan. All loan servicers do things a little bit differently, so you don't want to assume that they'll put you on the right kind of plan. You need to check for yourself and put yourself on that plan. And so again, it will be based on your monthly payment, and it typically requires you to prove your income yearly. I know every February-ish, we have to go online for Damien's loans, and they now make it easier. They now have us like linked directly to the IRS, so we can like just pull our tax returns from the previous year, and it will tell him what his new payment is. If you do not certify yearly, it will default to, I don't know, ours defaults to some crazy number. And then we don't want to pay that because you want to pay the lowest payment that you can make on an income-based plan because you're getting your balance forgiven later on. So if you want payments to be based on your income only and not your combined income with your spouse, so this is also something that Adam mentioned, you can file your taxes married filing separately. That's actually what we do. We do lose some tax benefits doing that, but we run the numbers most years. We double check both ways, and the lower payment is, in our case, worth it. And so we do it that way. So you might also want to look into that. So step 3 is the right kind of job or employer. And so this is actually where it gets a little bit more complicated. And I'm not going to cover every single thing about the right kind of job or employer because it's kind of a massive list. But for the PSLF, your employment must be for a qualifying employer, and it must be full-time. And full-time is defined by PSLF as your employer's definition of full-time or 30 hours per week, whichever is greater. If you're employed, if you have several part-time jobs that meet that requirement of full-time hours of 30 hours per week, between the 2 or 3, I guess, even more, you can use several part-time jobs to make up that full-time requirement. You would probably then just need several employment certification forms, one for each employer, which I'm going to talk about those in just a second, actually right now. So the simplest way to find out if you qualify in this area of having the right kind of job or employer is to fill out an employment certification form. I'm going to see if I can click on this link and not mess everything up. So this form is actually the one that we analyzed, my colleague and I, when we did our white paper, pretty in depth, and it is, the language of it is fairly complicated. That's what we did our research on. However, actually filling out the form really isn't that complicated as long as you understand all of the other things about the program, which is part of what I'm trying to go through for people now. So you kind of just give your identifying information up here at the top, and then there's a section about your employer, and you can get help from your employer filling out some of this information. Like, for instance, I don't know my employer's FEIN, but they do. If you go to HR, someone knows. And then you're just kind of answering these questions. And we'll talk more about this list in section 13 here in a second. And then there's a whole bunch of terms and things, and that's part of what our research discusses, is all of these terms and what they mean. Okay, so your employment, again, can be certified by an official who has access to your service records. So they have to know like when you started and that you work full-time, or that you're using it as one part-time job towards several that make up one full-time. And it's usually someone in your HR department. So every year you just kind of print it out and take it over to HR, and they will fill it out for you. And a lot of employers, I'm finding, know about this program at this point, kind of. And so they're not unfamiliar with this employment certification form. The first time you fill out this form, if you qualify, your loans will be automatically transferred to a loan management company called Fed Loan Servicing. This is the government's loan service company that's specifically for the PSLF. And then you will use their website, myfedloan.org, to make payments and monitor the status of your loans. And that's where all these screenshots come from. That's the loan company that oversees Damien's loan. So that's the one that I have access to. And if you're accepted into the program, it's a good idea to fill out an employment certification form yearly so that your payments are tracked as qualifying. This is not required. You do not have to do this, but this is sometimes an area where borrowers fall into a trap. They don't fill out one of these forms yearly, and then they find out that there is some issue with their qualification in one of the areas, and they didn't know it in a timely fashion. So if you fill it out yearly, that helps to kind of protect you a bit, and then you keep those forms so that you have them. And you should also fill out a new one if you change employers. Again, not required. It's just what I think is a smart way to handle it. So still step 3, right kind of job or employer. If you do fill out those forms yearly, you will see, I can't find my cursor, but you can see my, my red circle here. This website will track the number of payments that you've made that are qualifying and the number you have left, and it will give some estimated eligibility date. I never really think it's right when the date is right when I look at it, but this number does not change until you submit another employment certification form. So we usually do ours in September, for instance. So in September, we'll submit it, and this number will jump up like 11 or 12, because it's from the last time that we submitted. So if you want to be sure that your payments are being counted or uncover any possible issues, this is part of the way to do that. So because I'm talking to mostly law students or some lawyers, I also put in some information about what jobs seem to qualify for the PSLF in your area. This is not an exhaustive list. So there are lots of places to go for this kind of information, but related to legal careers, public interest law services are eligible for PSLF. So that means legal services that are funded in whole or part by a local, state, federal, or tribal government. Again, that just repeats the same thing, but basically needs to be a federal, state, local, or tribal government agency. A public child or family service agency qualifies. A nonprofit organization can qualify. One that's exempt from taxation and also is not engaged in religious activities unless your work for that organization is not related to the religious activities. A tribal college or university, or a private organization that provides some of the following public services, which you'll see one of those is public interest law services, but there's several others like related to education and library services, things like that, and is not, again, not a religious organization. So that's step 3. And step 4 is the right kind of payment. So you need to make a qualifying monthly payment every month for 10 years, equaling out to 120 payments. They do not have to be consecutive. So you could have a job that was a public service position for 5 years and you leave it and go to a private entity for 4 years, and then you come back to a public entity and you can pick your loan, your payments towards PSLF can be picked back up at that point. So it does need to be after October 1st, 2007, under a qualifying repayment plan, which we talked about in step 2, for the full amount due as shown on your bill. So if your payment is $75 a month, you can't pay $60 and have it count. And you can't pay it, more than 15 days late or it doesn't count. You also can't pay it more than 15 days early or it doesn't count. You also can't, for instance, if you're on an income-based repayment plan and they're like, hey, you only owe us $25 a month because you make very little as a public servant in whatever job you're working, you couldn't pay like $5,000 and pay off your 120 payments all at once. And I didn't do the math on that, so I have no idea if that's the right number. But you can't prepay because you have to certify as your income goes up, you're going to owe them more in following years. And again, while you're employed full-time by a qualifying employer. So again, we talked about that in step 3. You can make qualifying, I think I stole my own thunder here a little bit. You can't make qualifying monthly payments while you're in an in-school status, grace period, deferment, or forbearance. That is a slight possible exception to that related to COVID, which I'll talk about in just a second. They don't need to be consecutive, which I already said. If you make a monthly payment for more than the amount you're required to pay, you still can only get credit for one payment per month that counts for PSLF forgiveness. So you can't make faster payments, which I already said. If you do want to pay more, I don't know why anyone would want to pay more because your balance will be forgiven, but if for some reason you did, you should contact your servicer to ask that the extra amount not be applied to future payments, because otherwise you're paid ahead and then you can't get credit for a PSLF payment during the month in which it's due. So you want to kind of stay paying just the amount you owe for the most part. Step 5, you actually have to apply for loan forgiveness. So it's not automatic. After you make the 120 qualifying monthly payments, you can complete the application. And I'm not going to click on it because it actually looks very similar to the employment certification form that I already showed you, but it's available at this link. And you fill it out, and you are supposed to continue to make payments while it is being processed. And you have to still work for a qualifying employer while it's being processed and at the time of loan forgiveness. So you don't want to just go quit your job or change jobs right away. And there's some caveat on the website that says you may have to go ahead and fill out the employment certification forms all over again. So you should probably keep on file any ones that you submitted over the 10 years. Okay, so that was a lot of information all at once, but I now have some cases that I was going to talk through and show you, because there are so many pitfalls in this application process that people have been making mistakes, right? And so I wanted you guys to kind of look at some of these cases and see, there's only 2, and see what you think they did wrong, quote unquote. So we have Amanda.
I forget, just before I forget to ask the question, we actually had a question about whether this program is going to go away. Adam, maybe you could jump in and address that. But the question is, is there a possibility the public service loan forgiveness program would be eliminated by Congress? Would Congress make that decision? And if so, what would happen?
Sure, yeah. So just to be clear, the public service loan forgiveness program was created by statute. So the president, whoever the president is, cannot simply do away with it. It's a statutory program, so any repeal would have to be done by Congress itself. Now, could Congress do that? Yes. And in fact, there were 2 separate proposals to do just that. One was a budget proposal from the White House that was submitted to Congress, where they proposed defunding the program and effectively, eliminating it. And the other was a congressionally created repeal proposal through a statute or a bill called the Prosper Act, which would have reformed the Higher Education Act. Both of these proposals were submitted in the last Congress, when there was one-party control of both chambers of Congress and the White House. And what's interesting is that neither one of those proposals came close to passing either chamber. They didn't even come down to a vote in either chamber. They didn't come, there was very little chance of them passing. And now with a divided Congress, those proposals are effectively dead. That being said, if they had passed, both of the proposals also would have grandfathered in borrowers who were currently in school or borrowers who were currently in repayment. So the repeal only would have applied to borrowers who took out new federal loans after a certain date. So could a repeal happen? Yes. Would they grandfather people in? Most likely. They don't have to. There's nothing that compels Congress to grandfather people in, but I think that there would be political backlash if they did not grandfather people in. You're talking about angering pretty powerful constituents like healthcare workers, lawyers, government workers, police officers, military vets, folks that, teachers. So I think that eliminating those programs would be, politically problematic. And I think if you pulled out the rug from people who have already made life decisions premised on the existence of this program, you probably would have viable legal challenges as well. So is the program in any danger? I would say right now, not really. Is it possible that there could be future repeal efforts? Yes, but given that they could have repealed it, 1 or 2 years ago and they didn't, and that they would have grandfathered people in, I think that's cause to be cautiously optimistic, I would say.
Good. Thank you very much. Joni, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, that's fine. And that's essentially what I follow all those stories because they affect us. So I'm always seeing the news stories that say so-and-so wants to get rid of this program. And then I panic for 5 seconds and realize that it's not going away as of right now. So the first case is, I'm going to go through these quickly. Amanda Lawson Ross, and these are real people, planned her career around a government loan forgiveness program. She paid for 4 years and then found out that she doesn't qualify. She was told by her loan servicer that she only needed to make 120 payments and work in a public sector job, that she was on track and there was no problem. But then she called again after around the 4-year mark and was told something different. And basically the customer service person she talked to at that point said that not all of her loans would qualify. And it was the first time that she had been told that, even though she had asked. And so now the only way for her to receive forgiveness is, according to her loan company, is to consolidate her student loan payments and start all over again, making 10 years of qualifying payments. So the question is, what step that we talked about earlier, where did she go wrong? Anyone can answer. Except Adam, because you know. So where'd she go wrong? Step 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5?
Oh, good Lord, you're going to don't make Denali.
Step 1 was right kind of loan. Step 2 was
I would
sorry, go ahead.
That she definitely made a mistake in relying on her loan servicer to offer her good legal advice.
Absolutely.
I don't know. It sounds like she should have talked to an attorney maybe to find out that, to make sure that she was in the correct profession.
Yes, and she probably would. If I were her, I would talk to an attorney. But she went wrong almost at the very beginning. She does not have the right kind of loan, or at least doesn't have all of this. Not all of her loans are qualifying. So she has some type of loan that is not a direct federal loan, which is one of the initial requirements for the payment for the program.
I'll get it on Amanda Lawson Ross and her litigation.
Yeah, you should call her. Get in touch with her.
She's got some good attorneys who are doing
All right, and then case 2 is Kyra. She's told that her loan payments were ineligible for a federal program that forgives public service loan borrowers. And so she was enrolled in the wrong repayment plan, which should have been caught by her loan servicing company, but it did not. It was not. And then even once she transferred her loans to another company, they also did not catch it. And she now has to spend several more years making payments. So she thought everything was good and it was not. And she also is now being put into a different repayment plan, and it's more expensive. So what mistake did she make? It kind of tells you, right, that she was not paying the right kind of repayment. So she wasn't in the right repayment plan, one of the qualifying ones that we talked about in step 2. So also, Adam has already kind of talked about the implications for loans related to COVID, but specifically related to PSLF applicants. We're in a 0% interest period, and so any federally held student loans, they have to be federal, serviced by Fed Loan Servicing, which is the PSLF. That's why I'm focused there. So it's temporarily reduced to 0% until September 30th, 2020. And the accounts will automatically be adjusted so that no interest will accrue starting on March 13th, 2020. There's also a temporary suspension of payments. So all borrowers will automatically be placed on an administrative forbearance. So monthly payments are suspended, and this can last from March 13th, 2020 through September 30th, 2020. However, if you're in PSLF, like Adam mentioned, even though you will be in forbearance technically, and we talked about not being able to make qualifying payments when you're in forbearance, this is an exception to that. Those non-payments that have been made during that time will actually count as payments. So it's about 6 months worth of sort of free $0 payments that can still qualify towards PSLF. So, all right, hold on, I'm gonna end and see if I can stop sharing my slideshow. Okay, so I don't know if any more questions came in.
I think that's it, but I think what I would really emphasize here is that with any of these student loan programs, and what Adam had mentioned too, with just having a plan. So if you're gonna, if you want to pursue a program, go in eyes wide open. And when I say, and part of it is you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
I know my wife and I graduated. My wife's a lawyer too. We really didn't have much of a plan at all. And my wife ended up doing a bunch of government service, didn't really know she was going to do that, and was an unsuccessful applicant for this public service loan forgiveness program because actually didn't do all the things she needed to do in order to get the relief. So, I mean, here's the point. The point is go in, eyes wide open, figure out what those options are, and put yourself in the very best position you can to succeed, because you're going to have to deal with these things for a very, 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 very long time. And so do all you can do to protect yourself. So with that said, we have about 12 minutes left. I do want to pass things over to Dr. Nolan here, Mr. Jed Nolan, who heads the Veterans Clinic, is also a consumer law practitioner. One of my, I think, closest colleagues doing consumer law. We've run a bunch of cases together. We've done it for a long period of time. And so I think he wants to talk to you a little bit about cases and things of that nature, bankruptcy perhaps. And so I turn everything over to Jed. Thank you, Joni. Really appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Like Jonathan said, I'm the director of the Veterans Clinic, but I also litigate, and I sue these people, and I've sued them for 10 years now. So I'm approaching this from the perspective of a litigator. And so the first thing I want to talk to you about is to protect yourself, like Jonathan and Joni and Adam talked about. So when you walk into my office, you walk into Jonathan's office, or you call up Adam Minsky and you say, hey, I've got problems with my student loan servicer. Here's what we're going to want to see from you. We're going to want to see detailed records of all these communications you've had throughout the years with these loan servicers. Because as Joni has outlined for you, you really need to know more than the loan servicer you're talking about. Then you're talking to about these loan programs. You need to know what your program is. You need to know what your requirements are, because the person you're talking to on the telephone is a 23-year-old who could care less about you or your loans, and they're just putting in a 9-to-5 job. You have to know what you're eligible for and what you qualify for. And especially this group right here, you're all law students, lawyers. You've had higher level training. And if anything in law school has taught you is that what can go wrong will go wrong. So you need to be very detail oriented when you make your calls into the servicer. You show, here's where I'm working, here's what my income is. When they tell you something, you document it. You keep contemporaneous notes. You need to know what types of loans you have. Another website is the NSLDS, the National Student Loan. I always get confused. National NSLDS. You'd search, you put your information in. It'll tell you if it's a federal loan or a private loan. And that way, you'll have that information cleared up right away. If it's a federal loan, you stay in contact with your servicer because they can put you in income-driven repayment plans. These private loans are the nightmares, but there's also more potential with them, including for bankruptcy. If you figure out, all right, I've got these federal loans, I can't do anything about them in terms of bankruptcy, but these private loans over here, okay, well, that's when you need to start figuring out, you need to have the consult with an attorney. And that's where you call Jonathan Marshall here at the Center for Consumer Law and Education, and he's going to help you find the right bankruptcy attorney for you who knows the ins and outs, who's not the local bankruptcy guy who has filed bankruptcies for 30 years and he has never gotten a student loan discharge and wouldn't even try. You call the experts, we're going to find the people who are litigating these claims, these bankruptcy issues for these lenders on these for-profit schools who lent you way too much money, well above and beyond room and board and the cost of tuition. And there are some tricks that there's some avenues that you can use. And again, this is for when trouble strikes. You all need to be able to protect yourself. That's the front side of it. The other thing I want to briefly touch on too is, like Jonathan said, when he came out of school, he didn't plan on being a consumer law litigator. Well, student loan, and same thing with Mr. Minsky, is that he didn't plan on that. But right now, it's an evolving field, and there's litigation coming down by the day. Here in West Virginia, we have some pretty decent consumer protection law saying that, yes, there is the Higher Education Act, which tells these loan servicers how they have to contact you, what they're allowed to say, what they're allowed to do. But as long as there's no conflict between the West Virginia law and the federal law, then you still have those protections in place. For instance, they can't lie to you. Going back to Joni's example of Amanda Lawson Ross, who was told for 4 years that she was in the proper program, her employer qualified, and then only found out later that that wasn't true. She filed a lawsuit. She didn't just sit on her hands. She said, look, they didn't have to tell me yes or no, but I asked them directly. I asked them point blank, am I qualified with my loan payments here? And they said, yes, you're good to go for 4 years. They told her that. And what the court there in the 11th Circuit down in Florida, and this is just April 10th, so this is hot off the press, and I'm telling you, this is the cutting edge area that we're in. You know, the borrowers, they didn't say that they were misled about information that Great Lakes had to disclose, but Great Lakes was the loan servicer, voluntarily provided information on a matter on which it was not required to disclose, and while doing so, lied to her. Then, if that's the case, you have a legal claim. There is boundless opportunities because, as we've laid out here, there's $1 trillion+ of student loan debt. Everyone's got them, and there is so much mismanagement. It can boggle your mind, and it keeps you startled on a daily basis, but it also keeps you busy with potential work, like Mr. Minsky, like Jonathan Marshall, like me. So think about these in terms of a litigator to protect yourself, to make sure that you are fully armed with all the information you're going to need in case the worst happens, because like I said, you're in law school, you see that when something can go wrong, it will. And then also learn about it just so you can protect others, and you can get out there and make sure that these federal servicers are following the rules and the guidelines. All right, that's all I need, Jonathan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jed. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Joni. Does anybody else have any questions that they want to throw out for the good of the order about anything? We've got like 6 minutes left before this thing like literally just turns off. Okay. Give it a couple more minutes. All right. I'm not seeing anything. Once again, I really appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Joni. Thank you, Jed. I think that at least my intention is to possibly host another one of these in the future. And also, by all means, feel free to reach out to me separately if you have any questions, or Adam or Joni or Jed. We're here to help. We want to help you. And if, even if it's not a question about your student loans, you want to talk about a career or opportunities to practice in the space, by all means, we want to talk about these sorts of things. Just encourage you to reach out. So with that said, I'd say we're hereby adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody, and stay safe.